The first time a human promised to repay a debt, the Galactic Council laughed so loudly that 3 translators crashed trying to process the insult. I was there, seated in the upper observation ring of Chamber 12, 40 feet above the polished black floor, where ambassadors came to pretend the galaxy had rules. My name is Varric Then, Senior Record Keeper of the Outer Council, which sounds impressive until you realize my job was mostly watching powerful species lie politely to one another for 8 hours a day. I had heard threats dressed as peace offers, surrender terms disguised as trade agreements, and apologies so fake they should have required radiation shielding. But I had never heard anything as ridiculous as what Commander Ryan Mitchell said that morning. He stood alone behind the human delegation rail, wearing a dark blue uniform with no cape, no ceremonial armor, no glowing rank jewels, nothing that suggested he represented a species worth fearing. He looked almost offensively ordinary. 6 feet tall, maybe a little more. Brown hair cut short. Gray eyes. Hands folded behind his back like he was waiting in line at a coffee shop instead of addressing the oldest political body in known space. Across from him, the Valorian ambassador trembled so hard her silver headpiece kept chiming against her collar. Poor creature. Valoria was a small world, barely important enough to appear on military maps, a blue-green marble orbiting a tired yellow star near the trade lanes. Beautiful, harmless, and now surrounded by the Carthuan Dominion, a civilization that treated mercy like a clerical error. The Carthuan representative had already made the situation clear. Valoria would surrender its ports, its orbitals, and its voting rights before the next planetary rotation, or the Dominion would begin what they called administrative correction. Everyone in that chamber knew what that meant. Nobody said it out loud. That was how the Council survived. We polished ugly things until they sounded legal. The Valorians begged for protection. The Threxian League looked away. The Orion Compact requested more time. The merchant houses suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts. And then the humans stood. That alone was funny enough to start whispers. Humanity had been a member species for only 43 years, which in Council terms made them less a nation and more a recent weather event. They had arrived late to faster-than-light travel, late to galactic trade, late to diplomacy, and in my professional opinion, late to knowing when to stay quiet. Commander Mitchell placed one hand on the rail and asked, in a calm voice, "Did Valoria call the debt?" The chamber went still for half a second. Then came the laughter. Not polite laughter. Not nervous laughter. Real laughter. The kind that rolls through a room when someone small says something too large for their mouth. Even I smiled. A debt? From humans? What could humanity possibly owe that mattered to the Carthuan Dominion? Fuel credits? Emergency blankets? A strongly worded letter wrapped in sentimental nonsense? The Carthuan envoy leaned forward, his 4 golden eyes shining with amusement. "Commander Mitchell," he said, "are you suggesting your species intends to interfere because of an old favor?" The human did not blink. "No," he said. "I'm informing you that humanity pays its debts." That made the laughter worse. Across the chamber, someone actually tapped their desk in applause, as if the human had delivered a charming little performance before the real powers returned to business. I remember looking down at him and thinking how strange humans were, how dramatic, how attached to words like honor and promise and gratitude, as though the universe cared about any of those things. The universe cared about fleets. It cared about tonnage, production capacity, jump range, orbital control, and the cold arithmetic of survival. Promises did not move battleships. Gratitude did not stop an empire. Debt did not make the galaxy tremble. At least, that was what I believed when Ryan Mitchell turned away from the Laughing Council, touched 2 fingers to the small device at his wrist, and sent one plain message across 400 light-years of human space. The old debt is active. 43 years earlier, before humans had embassies, before their ships carried council transponders, before anyone in civilized space knew whether Earth was a nation, a disease, or a navigational hazard. One of their exploration vessels limped out of a failed jump near Valoria with 6% power and 87 people breathing recycled air that had begun to taste like metal. The ship was called the North Star, which I later learned was a sentimental human name for something ancient sailors once used to find their way home. Charming, I suppose, in the way primitive species turn terror into poetry. The North Star had no proper galactic beacon, no valid trade codes, no alliance marker, and no diplomatic protection. To any practical government, it was a drifting liability wrapped in unknown biology. Valoria should have ignored it. That would have been standard procedure. Unknown vessel, unknown species, unknown contamination risk, unknown political consequences. The proper council recommendation would have been quarantine at distance and a report filed within 3 to 5 administrative cycles. The Valorians did not do that. They broke quarantine law in under 9 minutes. Their rescue craft crossed 20,000 miles of unstable debris field to reach the human ship. Their engineers connected incompatible airlocks by hand, using emergency sealant and what their own report described as excessive optimism. Their medical staff treated every human aboard without knowing whether human blood, breath, or skin contact could harm them. Their governor opened the southern storm shelters to house the survivors, even though Valoria was in the middle of its flood season and every shelter bed was already assigned. For 31 days, humans lived under Valorian roofs, ate Valorian food, used Valorian power, and repaired their damaged vessel in a civilian port built for cargo barges, not deep space exploration craft. There was no payment, no treaty, no military exchange. The humans offered mineral rights, technical data, future trade access, and something called an emergency friendship accord, which sounded so ridiculous that the Valorian legal office refused to translate it literally. Governor Elian Voss declined all of it. His official statement was only 12 words long. You were lost in the dark, so we opened a door. I had read that line once in an archive and dismissed it as provincial sentiment. Small worlds loved moral gestures. It helped them feel large. What I had not understood, what none of us understood, was what happened on the final morning before the North Star departed. The human captain, a woman named Grace Mitchell, stood on the wet landing field beside Governor Voss, while rain slid off the nose of her repaired ship. She placed her palm over her heart and made a promise in front of 200 witnesses. One day, if Valoria calls, Earth will answer. A sweet little sentence. Almost childish. The kind of thing young species say before experience teaches them that history eats promises for breakfast. But humans are strange about words spoken in the rain. They write them down. They teach them to children. They carve them into walls. And 4 decades later, Commander Ryan Mitchell, grandson of Captain Grace Mitchell, still carried that promise like a loaded star map. The Carthuan Dominion did not choose Valoria because it was dangerous. That would have made sense. Dangerous worlds inspire caution, and caution was one of the few virtues the Dominion occasionally respected. No, they chose Valoria because it was gentle, and in the brutal mathematics of empire, gentleness looks exactly like permission. Their analysts marked the planet in green on the conquest board. Green meant low resistance. Green meant minimal fleet presence. Green meant no strategic depth, no heavy orbital platforms, no known weapons industry, and no allies reckless enough to intervene. I saw the assessment packet later, after everything had already gone wrong for them, and the arrogance practically leaked out of every line. Population modest. Economy agricultural and medical export focused. Military capacity ceremonial. Diplomatic value negligible. Recommended action, rapid annexation with public broadcast to discourage border defiance. There it was, written in clean official language, the kind that lets monsters sound like accountants. The Dominion had been expanding for 9 years along the eastern trade spine, swallowing refinery moons, communications hubs, and independent colonies too small to survive without council guarantees. They did not always arrive shouting. That was what made them effective. First came tariff disputes, then security inspectors, then claims of piracy near shipping lanes, then a request to station protective vessels in orbit. Then the protective vessels became occupation vessels, and everyone pretended to be surprised. Valoria had refused the first request politely. That was their mistake. They believed law still mattered when spoken to beings who used law as camouflage. The Carthuan High Marshal, Odrak Ven, responded with a message so smooth it should have been poured into a glass. He expressed disappointment. He expressed concern. He expressed a commitment to regional stability. 12 hours later, 30 Dominion ships crossed into Valorian space and positioned themselves in a perfect crescent between the planet and its largest moon. Not close enough to cause panic officially, close enough that every child on the night side could look up and see new stars that did not move like stars. I remember the council feeds that morning. Valorian traffic control asking for clarification. Dominion officers answering with rehearsed patience. Civilian pilots being redirected. Weather satellites being inspected. Trade vessels being told to hold position for their own safety. It was all so civilized that several ambassadors congratulated the Dominion on its restraint. I nearly did the same in the record notes. That is the embarrassing part. We had grown so used to power wearing a uniform that we forgot what invasion looked like when it smiled. Governor Mara Voss, granddaughter of the same man who once opened Valoria to the North Star, appeared before the council within the hour. She was smaller than I expected, wrapped in silver diplomatic cloth, her voice steady but thin at the edges. She did not ask for victory. She did not ask anyone to punish the Dominion. She asked for observers, legal protection, a pause, anything that might force the crescent in her sky to hesitate. The chamber listened with the deep compassion of people who had already decided not to help. And across the floor, Commander Ryan Mitchell watched the Dominion envoy smile like Valoria had already become a footnote. The council did what the council always did when courage became inconvenient. It formed a committee. Not a defense committee, of course. That would have sounded too decisive. It formed an emergency procedural review panel to determine whether Valoria's situation qualified as a sovereignty dispute, a border misunderstanding, a trade enforcement matter, or, my personal favorite, a temporary instability event. I wrote those words into the record with my own hands and hated how clean they looked. Governor Mara Voss stood alone at the petition rail while the great powers politely abandoned her in alphabetical order. The Threxian League expressed sympathy but cited distance. The Orion Compact requested verification from neutral observers who were, unfortunately, not available. The merchant houses offered discounted evacuation insurance. The Vel Assembly recommended calm. Calm. That was their gift to a planet with 30 Dominion ships sitting in its sky. Through all of it, Commander Ryan Mitchell said nothing. He remained at the human rail with his shoulders relaxed and his expression unreadable, as if the most powerful chamber in the galaxy had become background noise. That bothered me more than anger would have. Anger I understood. Threats I understood. But this stillness, this quiet human habit of going colder when the room grew hotter, made the small sensory hairs along my neck rise. The Carthuan envoy noticed it too. His name was Solvek Ro, a polished creature with gold eyes and a voice built for public surrender ceremonies. He turned toward Mitchell with theatrical patience. "Humanity has been very quiet," he said. "Are you preparing another sentimental declaration?" A few ambassadors laughed again, though softer this time. Mitchell looked at him. Not glared. Not challenged. Just looked. "No," he said. "I am waiting for the Valorian ambassador to speak the correct words." Governor Voss turned slowly, confusion tightening her face. "Commander, I do not understand." Mitchell's voice softened by a fraction. 43 years ago, your grandfather gave shelter to the North Star. My grandmother gave Valoria a promise. That promise was archived, witnessed, and accepted under human law. The chamber shifted. Suddenly, every translator was working harder. Human law was not a phrase most of us took seriously. We assumed it meant contracts, trade disputes, maybe parking penalties on orbital stations. Mitchell continued, "If Valoria requests repayment, humanity is obligated to answer." Solvek Ro actually smiled. Obligated by what enforcement mechanism? Mitchell did not look away from Governor Voss. By memory. That got a laugh from the Dominion benches. Not from me. I had just pulled the old archive file onto my display, and there it was, exactly as he said. Rain. Landing field. Captain Grace Mitchell. Governor Elian Voss. 12 words from Valoria, 1 promise from Earth. Governor Voss read the same file on her tablet. Her hand stopped shaking. Not because she was no longer afraid, but because fear had finally found something to stand behind. She lifted her head and spoke clearly into the chamber record. "Valoria calls the debt." The laughter died in pieces. Mitchell nodded once, touched the device at his wrist, and said, "Debt acknowledged." Then, across human space, bells began to ring. At first, I thought the phrase was symbolic. Bells began to ring sounded like one of those human expressions that turn ordinary events into poetry, because humans cannot simply say a signal was transmitted. Then the emergency archive channels opened across the council chamber, and I realized Commander Mitchell had not been speaking metaphorically at all. Bells were ringing on Earth. Actual bells. Bronze bells in old coastal cities. Digital bells in orbital habitats. Warning bells inside naval academies. Memorial bells mounted on colony domes under alien suns. The sound arrived through public civilian feeds before the military channels even admitted anything had changed. In New Boston, children stopped in a school courtyard and looked up as red lights moved across the morning sky. In Arizona, desert shipyards that had been producing water haulers powered down their civilian assembly lines in perfect sequence. Above the Atlantic, 3 orbital dry docks released ships still wearing construction frames, like giants waking before their armor was finished. On Mars, freight elevators began lifting sealed containers from underground vaults that the Galactic Council had never been told existed. I watched all of it from my record station, my fingers hovering above the transcript pad, suddenly unsure what language to use for a species that treated gratitude like a mobilization order. Around the chamber, the laughter had fully collapsed into whispers. Salvek Rowe, the Carthuan envoy, still wore his diplomatic smile, but it had become stiff at the corners. Ceremony, he said, loudly enough for the record. A cultural performance. Nothing more. I wanted to believe him. It would have been comforting. But the human rail had begun receiving confirmations, one after another, and Commander Mitchell did not look surprised by any of them. Pacific Fleet acknowledges. Lunar Reserve acknowledges. Titan Industrial Command acknowledges. Appalachian Defense Foundry acknowledges. Civilian Auxiliary Network acknowledges. That last one made several ambassadors lean forward. Civilian auxiliary sounded harmless until the numbers began appearing beside it. Thousands of ships. Not warships, officially. Cargo ships, fuel carriers, medical transports, survey cutters, mining rigs, atmospheric lifters, ice haulers, anything with a reactor, a crew, and a human flag painted somewhere on the hull. The humans were not only calling their military. They were calling everyone. A merchant house delegate made a small choking sound when a public route map lit up across 400 light-years. Lines of motion began bending toward Valoria from every human system. Slow ships shifted first. Fast ships vanished into jump corridors. Private vessels changed registration mid-flight and accepted temporary command codes without argument. I had seen empires mobilize before. Empires argue, delay, demand payment, protect prestige, and search for advantage. Humanity did something far stranger. It aligned. Commander Mitchell finally spoke again, not to the Dominion, not to the Council, but into the open human channel. No panic. No. Speeches. Valoria has called. We answer clean. Clean. That was the word he used. Not glorious. Not righteous. Clean. Like this was not revenge, not conquest, not politics, but a debt being removed from a ledger that humans had kept balanced for 43 years. Governor Mara Voss covered her mouth with both hands as the first human vessels crossed the outer relay markers. She looked relieved. The rest of us looked at the growing map and felt something colder than fear. We felt the first hint that we had mistaken human kindness for softness, when perhaps it had always been discipline waiting for a reason. The Dominion chose to make the ultimatum public because empires are never satisfied with obedience alone. They need an audience. They need frightened witnesses. They need small worlds to watch one planet kneel and imagine their own knees touching the floor next. At exactly 1900 Council Standard, every major relay in the Eastern Trade Spine received the same forced broadcast. Valoria appeared in blue and green beneath the camera feed, peaceful clouds curling over its oceans, cities glowing softly along the coastlines, farms spread out in clean gold squares across the continents. Then the image widened, and the Dominion crescent came into view above it, 30 ships arranged so perfectly that even I had to admit the picture was effective. It looked like a claw closing around a jewel. High Marshal Odrak then appeared on the central screen wearing white command robes, because the Carthuan loved symbolic purity almost as much as they loved taking things that did not belong to them. His voice rolled through the council chamber, rich, controlled, and insultingly calm. People of Valoria, you have been offered stability. You have been offered protection. You have been offered a place beneath the Dominion banner. Your leaders have chosen confusion over order. Therefore, You have 1 hour to accept administrative integration. He paused for effect. Every dictator I had ever recorded loved pauses. They mistook silence for wisdom. If you refuse, the Dominion will demonstrate the cost of disorder in a limited and measured fashion. Limited and measured. There were those polished words again. Nobody in the chamber believed they meant anything gentle. Governor Mara Voss stood frozen before the council display, her face pale beneath the silver markings of her office. Behind her, the Valorian delegation held hands in their species-old fear ritual, linking fingers so no one had to stand alone. Solvek Rowe looked pleased. He turned slightly toward Commander Mitchell, as if expecting the human to finally show panic, anger, desperation, anything useful. Ryan Mitchell gave him nothing. He simply watched the broadcast with that awful stillness, his hands folded behind his back. On the screen, Odrak then continued. No outside interference will be tolerated. Any vessel entering the secured zone will be treated as a destabilizing actor. That line was meant for humanity. Everyone knew it. The Dominion had seen the human movement map by then. They had seen the civilian ships bending toward Valoria. They had seen the reserve signals. But they still thought they understood the shape of the problem. That was their final luxury. A Carthuan tactical officer appeared beside the High Marshal and displayed a countdown over Valoria's capital. 60 minutes. Bright red numbers. Simple enough for children to understand. Cruel enough for adults to pretend was policy. Across the council chamber, delegates began sending private messages, evacuation advisories, market warnings, diplomatic apologies prepared in advance. I saw one ambassador quietly remove Valoria from a trade projection as if the planet had already become a rounding error. Then a new feed opened from human space. Not military. Civilian. Thousands of humans were watching the Dominion broadcast in city squares, shipboard mess halls, farm stations, orbital factories, high school gyms, and living rooms where families sat silent beneath the glow of distant Valoria. No cheering. No panic. No speeches. Just watching. That silence disturbed me more than any battle cry could have. Humans, I was beginning to understand, did not grow louder when something mattered. They grew focused. With 30 minutes left on the Dominion clock, the first human vessels entered the outer edge of the Valorian system. They were ugly things by galactic standards, boxy cargo haulers and patch fuel ships, none longer than 800 feet, their hulls scarred by honest work. The Dominion opened a warning channel and laughed. High Marshal Venn smiled for the broadcast. So these are Earth's champions. In the council chamber, Solvek Rowe spread his hands in mock sympathy. Commander Mitchell finally looked at him and said, "No, those are the witnesses." For 3 full seconds after Commander Mitchell said it, no one in Chamber 12 moved. That was the problem with humans. They dropped sentences like small stones, and only later did you realize the entire mountain had started sliding. Solvek Rowe narrowed all 4 eyes. "Witnesses to what?" he asked. Mitchell did not answer him. He raised his wrist device and opened a transmission on every public channel in the Valorian system. His face appeared beside High Marshal Odrak Venn's broadcast, calm, tired, almost disappointingly human. No dramatic music. No threats. No heroic posture. Just a man in a dark blue uniform speaking as though he were confirming a delivery receipt. "This is Commander Ryan Mitchell of the Terran Protective Fleet, acting under Article 7 of the North Star Accord. Valoria has called an acknowledged human debt. All vessels currently in system are present to verify lawful repayment." I heard a soft click beside me and realized it was my own upper mandibles locking together. Lawful repayment. He made it sound like paperwork. Across the chamber, several legal delegates began searching their databases so quickly their screens blurred. Solvek Rowe laughed once, too sharply. "There is no North Star Accord in council law." Mitchell finally looked at him. "Correct." A pause. "It is in ours." The human cargo ships continued forward, slow and plain and stubborn, spreading into a loose ring beyond the Dominion perimeter. Their hulls did not open to reveal hidden cannons. They did not charge. They did not even activate military shields. They simply took positions and began broadcasting identification codes, camera feeds, sensor logs, and live civilian testimony across every relay within reach. A fuel hauler from Houston Station. A medical transport from New Philadelphia. A mining barge registered out of series. A school ship carrying navigation cadets from the Lunar Academy. One by one, they announced themselves as witnesses, not combatants, and every word entered the public record before the Dominion could jam it without making itself look afraid of unarmed observers. That was the first clever thing. The second was worse. Those ships were not blocking the Dominion. They were surrounding the truth. Every Carthuan movement, every targeting sweep, every threat pulse, every private military signal leaked into open space with a human timestamp attached. The Dominion had wanted an audience. Humanity had brought court reporters. High Marshal Ven's perfect smile faded by one careful degree. "Remove those vessels from the secured zone," he ordered. His tactical officer sent a warning burst toward the nearest human hauler, a rust-colored ship with the absurd name Lucky Penny painted along its side in white letters 50 feet tall. The Lucky Penny answered with a calm, automated voice. "Warning received. Witness status maintained. No fear. No retreat. Just that terrible human habit of standing exactly where they had decided to stand." The countdown above Valoria dropped below 15 minutes. Governor Mara Voss whispered something in her own language, too quiet for the translator. The Dominion fleet shifted formation, trying to look dominant, while 30 civilian cameras watched from every angle. Then Commander Mitchell spoke again, this time directly to High Marshal Ven. "You are looking at the wrong ships." Ven's eyes flicked toward the tactical display. So did mine. At first, I saw nothing. Empty space behind the Dominion crescent. Valoria's largest moon. A scatter of dust, ice, and old mining debris. Then the moon's shadow moved. Not naturally. Not slowly. It opened like a curtain. The empty space behind the Dominion filled with transponder lights. Thousands of them. Silent until that exact second, arranged in layers so deep my display could not count them all. Human military vessels had been there the entire time, tucked cold behind the moon, engines. Dark, signatures buried under Valoria's own gravity well. The civilian ships had arrived first because the warships were already in the room. Commander Mitchell lowered his hand. "Witnesses confirm," he said. "Repayment may proceed." The Dominion did not understand the silence at first. That was the part one will never forget. 30 Carthuan warships faced Valoria, proud and polished, and certain of their own reflection, while behind them a human fleet unfolded from the moon's shadow, without a single victory cry. No drums. No anthem. No heroic announcement. Just transponders blooming across the dark like a field of cold stars. Carriers, defense cruisers, signal ships, medical ships, drone tenders, fleet anchors, vessels so large my display automatically switched from feet to miles, and then politely asked whether I wished to compress the scale. I did. It still did not fit. High Marshal Odrak Ven stared at the tactical projection as if the universe had committed a personal offense. His officers spoke over one another, then stopped speaking when the numbers became clear. They were not facing a rescue force. They were inside a prepared legal, tactical, and informational trap built with the patience of a species that had waited 43 years to make one promise matter. Solvek Rose stood in the council chamber with his smile gone completely now. "This is illegal," he said. Commander Mitchell tilted his head slightly. "No. Your own broadcast established intent. Your own fleet crossed into Valorian sovereign space. Your own countdown created the emergency. Your own warnings defined the secured zone. Humanity is responding to a formal request from a protected debtor world, under witnessed record." His voice stayed calm, which somehow made it worse. "You wrote the door. We walked through it. Then the human fleet moved. Not forward in a charge, not wild, not hungry. It moved with the precise confidence of a machine that had already finished the math. The first wave was not weapons fire. It was light. Millions of tiny signal points scattered through the Dominion formation, each one attaching itself to a communications channel, sensor band, targeting path, and engine. Control frequency. The Carthuan screens turned white, then blue, then filled with human legal notices in 17 languages. Their command network did not explode. It simply stopped agreeing with itself. Ships that had been arranged like a claw began drifting out of alignment as their systems locked into safety protocols they could not override. Their weapons powered down under remote audit. Their engines reduced output to station-keeping levels. Their targeting computers began displaying civilian witness feeds instead of attack solutions. In the council chamber, one ambassador whispered, "They are not fighting them. I answered without meaning to. They are repossessing the battle. High Marshal then shouted orders that arrived late, bounced wrong, or returned stamped as non-compliant under human emergency interdiction law. I did not know that law existed. Neither did he. That seemed to be the theme of the day. The Dominion tried to pivot 3 ships toward the civilian witness ring, and before they completed half a degree of motion, 12 human cruisers placed themselves between the Carthuan and the unarmed vessels with shields bright enough to paint Valoria's night side silver. No impact. No drama. Just a wall. A clean, impossible wall. Commander Mitchell opened one final channel. High Marshal Venn, your fleet is contained. Your broadcast is preserved. Your countdown is cancelled. You may stand down with dignity, or you may continue embarrassing yourself in front of the entire galaxy. For the first time since I had known the Carthuan Dominion, no one in their delegation had a prepared sentence. The red numbers above Valoria reached 0. Nothing fell from orbit. No city vanished. No child looked up at a false star in fear. Instead, every Dominion ship went dark one by one, not destroyed, not shattered, simply powerless, quiet, and surrounded by the patient blue lights of a human fleet that had arrived before the threat was even spoken. Governor Mara Voss began to cry silently. Commander Mitchell did not celebrate. He only looked at the frozen Dominion envoy and said, "Debt repayment is complete." The official record says the crisis ended 12 minutes after the countdown reached 0, but that is one of the many lies governments tell because the truth makes them uncomfortable. The crisis did not end when the Dominion fleet powered down. It ended 3 days later, when the first Carthuan withdrawal convoy left Valorian space under human escort, its proud banners dimmed, its command codes restricted, its broadcast archives locked open for every court, school, and colony in the Eastern Trade Spine to study. No one called it a defeat in the council chamber. They called it a resolution, a stabilization, a diplomatic correction, anything except what every child with access to a public feed already understood. The Dominion had tried to make Valoria an example. Humanity had made the Dominion into one instead. I watched Governor Mara Voss return to her home world on a human shuttle because Valorian traffic control was still untangling the emergency lanes. When she stepped onto the landing field, thousands of Valorians waited in the rain, holding small lamps under clear shelter cloth. The image struck me harder than it should have. 43 years earlier, her grandfather had stood in weather like that and opened a door for a dying human ship. Now, under the same kind of sky, human crews were unloading shield generators, medical supplies, orbital repair equipment, and enough food stores to feed 3 continents through the next harvest season. They did not pose for glory shots. They did not demand statues. Most of them looked embarrassed when Valorians tried to thank them. One old human engineer simply pointed at the rain and said, "We have been here before." That line spread faster than the battle footage. It appeared on station walls, news banners, academy boards, and eventually in the council archive, attached to the North Star Accord under cultural significance. Solvek Rowe resigned within a week. High Marshal Odrak Venn was recalled by his own government for strategic review, which was the Dominion way of saying someone had misjudged the cost of arrogance. But the real change was quieter. Trade fleets began checking whether small worlds had ever aided human vessels. Military planners added a new column to threat. Assessments, human debt exposure. Insurance companies raised rates for any operation near a protected debtor world. The merchant houses, those shameless insects of opportunity, began offering premium historical favor audits. And in every serious war college, instructors played the Valoria broadcast and paused at the exact moment Commander Ryan Mitchell said, "Those are the witnesses." That became the lesson. Not the fleet. Not the hidden ships. Not the legal trap. The witnesses. Because humans had not only come to save a friend, they had made sure the galaxy understood why. That was the part that frightened us most. Power alone is predictable. Empires want territory. Traders want profit. Politicians want applause. But humanity had revealed something far more dangerous than strength. Continuity. They remembered kindness across generations. They turned gratitude into doctrine. They treated a promise made by a frightened captain in the rain as if it were a military treaty written in fire. Years later, when new ambassadors ask me why the council chamber grows silent whenever a human says the word dead, I tell them the truth we should have learned sooner. Humans are not monsters because they hate. Many species can hate. Humans are monsters because they remember who helped them when they were weak, and when they return, they bring the weight of every year they spent becoming strong.